Hello and welcome to the Game Theory Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Vecenie. We're presented by CLNS Media. Today on the show, we've got good friend of the program, returning again, Cole Zwicker, to talk about the NBA playoffs. We're both really excited just generally about the NBA playoffs. We thought it would be good to continue the partnership throughout the rest of this playoff craziness as it continues to go on. Cole, how's it going, man?
It's going well. I just plowing through a bunch of playoff games today. I unfortunately forgot to record the Blazers game last night, but I realized that NBA TV does these replays really handy over a course of an hour, so you can just DVR that, and it shows you about 85% of the game. So I just watched Blazers-Pelicans, which is my favorite series of the first round.
Yeah, I hit Synergy all day. I hit every single series, I think, because Monday was my birthday, and then yesterday I decided, okay, I'm just going to take a night with Laura, given the fact that the week is going to get a little bit crazy here at the end because my parents are coming in, or my mom's coming into town. And I figured that it'd just be, a little bit smarter to get hanging out with the girlfriend out of the way early and then work throughout the later portion of the week. And then the weekend when my mom gets to town, we'll hang out and have a good time.
Well, happy late birthday, man.
Thank you. Laura and I went to a place called the Golden State. If you're out in LA, I would suggest doing that. Very, very good burger. Like probably, I would say one of the top 5 burgers in the city of Los Angeles. I don't know where else it is in the state, but very, very high quality burger.
I'll take note of that myself the next time I go to LA, which hopefully won't be for a while because I just can't stand the traffic, but we'll see.
You really get used to the traffic. I think that it's because I work from home that I don't really care about it. But
there you go.
At the same time, anytime I go out, I'm just like, you know what? This is not terrible. I just listen to podcasts and catch up on things. Before we get into playoffs, I want to make a quick note. Aaron Popovich passed away, Greg Popovich's wife. Very, very sad, very terrible that this has happened. She had not really been a part necessarily of the public NBA community, but I think you could tell by the outpouring of respect that kind of came for her and for Greg after her passing was announced about midway through the Cavs-Pacers game on Wednesday night, that she was someone that was widely respected throughout the industry. And, condolences to Greg Popovich, condolences to the Spurs, to their family, everything like that.
Absolutely, for me too. Well said.
And like the biggest thing that I took away from it was like everyone, and not the biggest thing, but like one thing that I took away from it, I guess, is just generally, everyone's been making a big deal about Greg Popovich being a bit more ornery than normal or, whatever in post-game press conferences and all that. And I think that more than anything, he's been a bit more introspective and a bit more kind of brushing off the basketball side of things. And I think that what that goes to show is that just whenever you're talking to these people and you're talking online and you're talking about these people, you just don't know what's going on in their personal life. Like Adrian Wojnarowski reported after this that, she'd been dealing with illness for quite a while. And, I feel like most people throughout the NBA community, especially myself, certainly didn't know that. And I think that, you kind of have to go into speaking with these people as a media person. And then also, just as a consumer of media, understanding that there is a circumstance where you don't know everything about these people's personal lives, and you have to be empathetic to what they're going through in a pretty significant way.
Yeah, there's an enormous human element, just like there is for all people in society. It doesn't dissipate when you deal with NBA players and NBA personnel. So absolutely, everybody there is a real human being, and they have below the surface struggles that everybody else goes through. So my condolences as well to Popovich. I mean, it's obviously, a sobering reality. So that's all I can really say on it.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like the idea of the NBA and just like thinking of these people as athletes kind of dehumanizes them in a real way, but you have to find a way to really empathize with them and be a real human being. I think they are all real human beings, and I think it's important to remember that, especially in a time like this where everything just kind of goes out the window in terms of the series. I don't think it matters. It's not important anymore, and I think you could tell that by the reactions that we saw from LeBron and from Kevin Durant and from all of the videos that have been posted throughout the course of the night here on Wednesday. Let's move on and talk a little bit about basketball, though. We're going to go through each of the 8 playoff series. We are now through game 2 in each series. We're going to start with Pacers-Cavs because I felt like that was pretty interesting. We're going to go through the top 3 series that are all 1-1, and then we're going to go through the 5 series that are 2-0 in the second half of the podcast. I do want to start with Pacers-Cavs, though. The Cavs pick up a big win against the Pacers, 100-97. This was a game that started out pretty ugly. LeBron James dropped 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 3 assists in the first quarter. He took it upon himself to just dominate throughout the course of that quarter to set a tone, and then throughout the course of the game as well. But the Pacers just kind of kept chipping away. They actually won the second, third, and fourth quarters of this game to push it back to a 3-point final margin that really was 6. Victor Oladipo hit a meaningless 3 at the end of the buzzer to kind of push it back. But, LeBron goes for 46 points on 17 of 24 shooting, 12 rebounds, 5 assists. He was absurd in this game, but the fact that they only won that game by 3 whenever they got that kind of performance from him sends up some pretty scary red flags to me.
If you're a Pacers fan, if you're the Pacers organization, you're feeling good about this. I mean, Victor Oladipo only played 28 minutes in this game because of early foul trouble.
Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about that, too.
He was a plus 11 in this game. Like, their offense just falls apart without him on the floor just because he is the engine. He's the guy that gets to the rim. He has the dynamism to pull up. So he didn't play the normal amount of minutes he usually does. And if you account for that, I mean, there's a chance that despite LeBron absolutely going off, and a lot of these shots were just incredibly ridiculous shots, like fadeaways in the post. I mean, LeBron just was peak LeBron, pinnacle LeBron as far as his offensive capabilities. But if you're the Pacers, like all that happened, Oladipo's in foul trouble. He didn't play his normal minutes, and you still only lost by 3 points. Oladipo had a chance to tie that game on a pull-up 3 late in the game off a stagger screen action with, I think 32 seconds left. So if you're the Pacers at Cleveland, when Cleveland has to have that game, you're feeling pretty damn good right now.
Yeah, and I think that they should. Really, the key here is that let's start with the Cavs' kind of adjustment first and foremost. They decided to start Kevin Love, LeBron, J.R. Smith, Kyle Korver, and George Hill. It's a very interesting lineup. It's significantly downsized from the first game where they started Jeff Green and Rodney Hood, both of whom are bigger than J.R. Smith and Kyle Korver and obviously present some more athleticism, I would say. But the idea here, I think, from Ty Lue was simply just to put spacing around LeBron James, put smart basketball players next to him, and just let them do their thing. And I liked the fact that they just decided, hey, we're going to try and outscore Indiana. We don't think we can stop them anyway, so we're going to try and outscore them. But the funny thing was that I thought the Cavs defense was actually pretty solid in this game, even though they, for the most part, played a lineup that really shouldn't be all that solid.
I agree with that. And we talked last time on the podcast about putting Korver and J.R. Smith, giving them the minutes instead of Hood, and then, of course, Jeff Green. And I think a lot of it was schematic. A lot of it was matchup based. You remember in the first game, Miles Turner was guarding Jeff Green, and he could kind of, play on him, and they could hide him there. In this game, he started out on Kevin Love, and he could not hang there. I mean, Love is too much of a dynamic threat in pick and pop. It's hard for Turner to cover that kind of ground and pick and roll. So they moved him to J.R. Smith, which worked okay. Smith still got a couple looks, I think, but that was better for them. I still think the Cavs could have done a better job targeting him. And then they slid Turner from Smith, I believe, to George Hill in the second quarter. So you saw kind of like the cat and mouse game between the two teams. I really like Korver on the floor with LeBron. I just think Korver, if he's healthy, he has to be on the floor with what they need. They have to outscore guys. They have to have the spacing around him. He has the dynamism as far as coming off screens. The actions they run between LeBron and Korver as far as these dribble handoff actions, these pick and rolls, I think are deadly. Also, like these down screen actions they run for involving Korver and Love, where Love can read the situation and either pop out off of a Korver down screen or post up if they switch. Those actions are also really deadly. And I thought overall in this game, the Cavs didn't really move the ball that well offensively. It was a lot of isolation-based stuff. I think they could actually improve there, but I agree with you. I think defensively they held up. Who knows how much of that is because Oladipo didn't play his normal amount of minutes. I don't know. At certain times, their matchups aren't going to be great. They don't have the rim protection, right? I mean, they're not playing really any rim protector. Like Larry Nance is probably their best bet there just because of his pop, but he's not really a natural guy. But this is a matchup they could probably get away with that at, especially if Oladipo's out, because he's the one guy that puts pressure on the rim consistently for the Pacers.
I think that the funniest thing that has happened for the Cavs in this series is that they only have one lineup that has played in both of the games. It's the George Hill, J.R. Smith, LeBron James, Kevin Love, Larry Nance lineup, and it's just gotten demolished. They've played it for 2 minutes, or I think 1 minute in each game, and it's just gotten destroyed in both, and Ty Lue has had to switch it. They've totally switched their rotation for game 2. They scrapped whatever they were doing in game 1 and decided, okay, we're going to do something different, and I think that the lineup change certainly worked. They played 16 minutes together, those starters. They had a 168.7 offensive rating when they were together. That's the kind of thing that is just about insurmountable for a Indiana Pacers team that is good and has some offensive firepower and spaces the floor pretty well, but just doesn't quite have the oomph that LeBron James can certainly bring to the table. I would also point out that unit only had a 105.4 defensive rating. That's fine for Cleveland by their standards. I would point out, too, their second most used unit is George Hill, Rodney Hood, Jeff Green, LeBron James, Kevin Love, that starting unit from game 1, I'm sorry. That has a pretty decent defensive rating. LeBron, Kevin Love, Larry Nance, Rodney Hood, J.R. Smith, just the LeBron at the point guard lineup. That has a pretty solid defensive rating. The bench unit of Larry Nance, J.R. Smith, LeBron, Kevin Love, and Jose Calderon has a pretty solid defensive rating. They're doing fine defensively in this series. The key is that they're not getting anything offensively from anyone other than LeBron, George Hill, and Kyle Korver. Kevin Love had 15 points and 8 rebounds in this game. It took him 16 shots and 3 turnovers to get there. J.R. Smith had a good first game. He was not very good offensively in this game, but he did provide some defensive push. Jose Calderon, Jordan Clarkson, Rodney Hood, these guys just aren't really bringing enough game-breaking offensive ability, and obviously Jeff Green isn't going to do that either. So I'm a little bit worried about what we've seen. If I'm the Cavs going forward, they need to get more out of guys like J.R. Smith, out of Kevin Love, to be honest. Hopefully, I know that the x-rays came back negative on the thumb. Hopefully he's going to be good to go for game 3. Jordan Clarkson could give them something, hopefully. Rodney Hood could give them something. They need someone else to step up, though.
Agreed. And it's also worth noting, this is my final point on the matchup, is that George Hill only played 20 minutes tonight. He drew 6 fouls, and he was a plus 16 in their matchup. I mean, they need him on the floor for his gravity force. He knows how to cut off the ball. Yep. And defensively, he's quick enough to stay with Collison. Calderon made some shots tonight, but he's a liability defensively against these guards. He's not going to be able to stay in front of Oladipo or Darren Collison. So they 100%. Really need George Hill. They're really relying on him in this trait to provide some veteran leadership to make the right play. So the fact he only played 20 minutes is probably something we should note at the forefront of maybe the Cavs can improve as the series goes on. And again, I do think that they can do a better job trying to attack Miles Turner. They didn't do that fully tonight. They did it a little bit, but I still think they could really, really headhunt him and put in lineups that can harm him. And I think a good start tonight was the starting lineup they put out, and then just being like, well, if you're going to guard Kevin Love, we're going to pick and pop you to death. If you're going to go guard J.R. Smith, they could have done a better job involving him in pick and roll, maybe getting him off some down screen action. So there's ways to combat this if you are the Cavs. Yeah,
and Miles Turner was good in the first half offensively, I thought, but couldn't take advantage late of some of the advantages that he was getting. The Cavs were switching everything defensively in this game. Turner had some very real opportunities to take advantage of his matchup and didn't quite do it. And I think that ultimately the decision that's going to come back to haunt Indiana is the Victor Oladipo decision, though. The fact that Nate McMillan sat him for the final 11 minutes of the first quarter and then sat him, I believe, for the final 4, maybe 3 minutes of the second quarter after he picked up that third foul was bananas. He ends the game with 3 fouls. He averages 2.3 fouls per 34 minutes. It would have taken 4 fouls in the first quarter for me to take Victor Oladipo out, given how messy they look offensively without him on the floor.
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. That's absolutely the right decision in my opinion, as far as leaving him on the floor. I'm all for guys letting players play through foul trouble, especially if they're perimeter guys and are not very foul prone. If you get some bigs that you just don't trust in certain post-up matchups or in space, I could see maybe relieving them. But a guy like Depot, where you have the Cavs on the brink too, you have him 1-0, and this is your chance to like step on their neck, and leaving him out of the game, who knows what happens now? You're dealing with one of the two best players of all time on the other side of the floor. So I think you got to do your best in this moment to really seize control. So I'm with you on this. I think they should have let him play through it.
Yeah, no question. And he's been incredible in this series offensively. There was that one play where he just looked at LeBron across from him in a switch situation. He backed up, got a full head of steam, and literally just blew by LeBron. Like with ease.
That was nuts.
It was crazy. He's finishing around the rim with ease. He's knocking down 3-point shots, even though he went 2 of 8 in this game. He is an unbelievable player right now. Like I'd seen probably 12 Pacers games throughout the course of the year. Like I'd seen them quite a bit, but I wasn't 100% sure how his game would translate with this group, with this roster, to a playoff setting. He's been incredible. He's been everything that you could ask and more for Indiana, and I'm excited to see where this goes from here when they get to Indiana. It's going to have a totally different feel from a series perspective. Like you said, there are some, I think, specific matchup-based adjustments that Cleveland could make that make me think they could put their role players into better positions, that they can put Kevin Love in better mismatch positions, put some of their guards in better mismatch positions against Miles Turner on an island. But I don't know. It's harder to get those matches whenever you're on the road and you're in a hostile environment and you have to worry about multiple other things than just the game plan.
Well, they definitely have to worry about the fact that the Pacers are not going to quit. We know that now. That's their MO all year. They're going to play hard for every single minute of the game, and that's what keeps them close. Like, they don't have incredible talent on their roster. It's just they all play hard. They play together. And Oladipo is a terrible matchup for the Cavs because, again, they don't really have like a lockdown perimeter guy, and they don't have enough rim protection. So if you can get him going downhill and he's blown by LeBron, they don't really have an answer for that.
A couple other notes here. I would like to see the Pacers get a little bit more out of Bojan Bogdanovic. He was really good in the first game, wasn't quite as good this game. Domantas Sabonis was terrible in this game. He was legitimately awful. He had the flagrant foul. He missed so many shots at the rim, and some of them were just like blatant flails. He's a little bit more mobile defensively than what I think he gets credit for, and he might be the key to unlocking some of these lineups if the Cavs play Miles Turner off the floor in their next game. But the key for that is Sabonis has to play better and prove that he can be on the floor offensively.
I agree with that, and I think they can do a little bit better of a job. I don't know what he is as a floor spacer as far as consistency or posting up, but
not one. They'll let him shoot it.
Exactly. Like, he's not a gravitational threat for sure, but he is pretty good usually in pick and roll as far as making himself available, making the right pass on short rolls. He can flip his hips quickly. So I want to see a little bit more playmaking. But I agree. I think that he was kind of disappointing tonight.
Let's go ahead and move on to the series that went 1-1 on Monday. The Miami Heat beat the Philadelphia 76ers 113-103. This one came down to 4 players, I should say, for me on Miami, who one of them was pretty good in the first game, I thought, but the other 3 were only okay, and they've really stepped up in game 2. The first one is Goran Dragic. This team is just so much more dangerous when he's a scoring threat. He's a plus 11 in this game, and I think that shows. Drops 20 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. James Johnson was a key in this game, 7 for 7 from the field, 18 points, 7 rebounds, 5 assists, and took the tough matchup guarding Ben Simmons. They switched him onto Simmons in this game. And I mean, Simmons still had a great game, but it was still a circumstance where he struggled more with his game than with James Johnson guarding him than he did through the first couple of games. Josh Richardson is an unbelievable two-way player. I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NBA. He only goes 1 for 5 from 3, but he goes for 14 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks, and makes a huge impact defensively on some of the wing players that were so successful with the 76ers in the first game and guarding Simmons occasionally here and there. And then finally, Dwayne Wade went for 28 points, 7 rebounds, and 3 assists in this game. It was a total blast from the past. He made a shit ton of contested shots that I do not think will happen again in this series, but it was the kind of performance that they needed to swing a game in Philadelphia, and that could potentially swing a series in their favor ultimately, because now they have home court advantage.
Exactly. And I think that's the key is whatever Wade does from here on out, he kind of won them that game just with his difficult shot making down the stretch.
Yep.
Like he was fantastic. I agree with who you pointed out as far as who contributed, but if they don't have Wade's contributions as a scorer, they don't win that game. And he came up so big for a veteran presence like that, for the tough shot making in difficult situations. That's the kind of experience. I know that's kind of a lazy narrative to play in the playoffs, but he's obviously ready for the moment. Like, it's not too big for him, and he stepped up in a huge way on the road.
Well, here's the thing, though. Like, this team gets by on effort, on defense, and on athleticism. Like, this is one of the few teams in the NBA that I look at, and I think I can say, this team's probably a little bit more athletic than Philadelphia. James Johnson's a really good athlete. Tyler Johnson's pretty good athlete, especially as like a bench scorer. Justice Winslow, Bam Adebayo, even like a guy like Dwayne Wade coming off the bench is your ninth man or whatever. Josh Richardson, really good athlete. Like, these guys are all long, they defend, and they can cause you issues with their effort alone. What they lack a little bit of is shot creation, right? It's kind of why they start Tyler Johnson. If Goran Dragic isn't going, this team doesn't really have anyone who can create their own shot. That's the element that Wade brings to them, and that's the element that was so important to them in this second game. They needed Dwayne Wade's ability to at least create off the dribble or create out of the post.
Especially because Dragic, if you remember, got early foul trouble. So like the first 3-4 minutes of the game, and he was going off too. Like, he was getting to the rim. I think, because obviously Philadelphia started Ersan Ilyasova at the 5, and Dragic was having no problem getting to his spots near the basket. And I think that might be why they started Amir Johnson, the Sixers being in the second half, maybe to get a little bit more length out there to negate some of Dragic's drives. I have no idea if that's actually true. But overall, I definitely agree. They don't really have that top-level score if Dragic isn't going. And just what you talked about as far as the effort level and the athleticism, we talked about last time on the podcast, the Sixers run a ton of off-ball screening actions. They run a lot of floppy sets, a lot of just sprinting off of screens. And the Heat are like one of the few teams that actually has the athletes to kind of track. Like, Josh Richardson was flying everywhere. Like, when he was on Redick, he was locked in trail. He was, coming around screens quickly. Tyler Johnson can fly around. Winslow is definitely fast enough to keep up. Even Ellington has enough as far as just sprinting and effort to.
What Wayne does is he understands coming off of screens as well as anyone. It's kind of like JJ Redick, right? They're both so good defensively at defending guys on screens because they do it so often. They know the footwork. They know it exactly in terms of what they need to do.
Exactly right. And I know the Sixers went 7 of 36 from 3, so 19.4%. Some of those were open looks, but some of those are just the fact that Miami was much more, I thought, intense, harassing their shot attempts. And I think, again, they're one of the few teams that has like the combo guards, like the wing types who can really get out and apply pressure to you, sprinting off of those kinds of actions.
We talked a little bit about switching James Johnson onto Ben Simmons on the last podcast. What did you think of the way that the Heat defended him in this game? He goes for 24 points, 9 rebounds, and 8 assists on like efficient shooting. He was really good in this game, but I do think there was a noticeable difference in the effort he had to exert to be successful in this game.
I totally agree with that. And I think, they started out again with Richardson on him, and they quickly switched to Johnson, and they threw in Winslow a little bit in there. We talked about that after I forgot that Johnson existed for 15 seconds on the last podcast. But I like that stronger body on Simmons and the way they defended him. Sagged off a little bit at times. I thought Johnson especially did a good job of that because he can still get to the spots that Simmons wants to drive to. Yep. And Simmons, he is going to run through Johnson still. He did on multiple occasions when he gets ahead of steam. That's going to happen, but I did feel like he was working harder for things. He got a couple baskets in transition that weren't really on Johnson, and that's going to happen because Simmons is just too good of a player. But I definitely like that move. I like Richardson more as far as his speed in this matchup, guarding Redick types, guarding Marco Bellinelli. I would rather him do that. He was even guarding Saric at times, but I would rather put a bigger body on Simmons for the reasons we discussed before.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like that as well. What do you think of this series going to Miami now? Because it looks like Joel Embiid is probably not going to play in Game 3. He's listed as doubtful. He's obviously quite angry about that. So we basically have the same kind of matchup, fundamentals here going forward for the next game. I mean, is this a circumstance where Philadelphia, they only lost by 10 despite shooting 19% from 3 and 41% from the field? Given their offensive firepower, they should feel pretty good about that, especially given the fact that they got like a crazy Dwayne Wade performance in this one? Or should we feel like Miami has kind of figured out how to track these off-ball screens and how Ben Simmons wants to attack going forward to the rim?
I think that Miami's figured some things out, but I've always viewed this series as kind of a shot variant series. Whoever gets their shots going is probably going to win, just because neither have like a dynamic. I mean, Simmons is a creator, but he's not like a dynamic self-creator, like as far as a scorer, because he doesn't have that pull-up with him. I mean, he can still score the ball, but he wants to pass. He's driving to pass, and I don't think this series has like a very high-level scorer that will just take it over. Of course, we saw Wade do that. I don't expect Wade to have the same exact performance again. He could very easily have that, but I would bet against it at this juncture. So for me, it just comes down to who hits more of their threes, unless, of course, Embiid returns, and that throws a whole new wrench into this series, because then you get to involve Whiteside more. Embiid's winning that matchup for sure, but that just makes it a completely different series as far as most of this is just 5-out ball. And it's basically a lot of screening action, who makes their threes, who gets their cuts. But yeah, it just comes down to who makes open shots.
Yeah, and I guess that we'll probably talk about the Embiid factor more on the next podcast, just because, again, it doesn't look like he's going to play in Game 3. Maybe he will play in Game 4. The deal there is, I guess, that doctors have told him, according to Keith Pompey, that if he was to get elbowed in the face or something, there is like significant question marks about if there could be like long-term structural damage to his eyesight and to his face. So it is still a very precarious position in a lot of ways. But I just wonder if he returns, if the move for Miami is to play more Adebayo and not more Whiteside, just because he's a more fluid athlete who can actually guard in space. And it's not like he has like a wild amount less game than Hassan Whiteside.
I definitely agree with that. And then at that point, you might be talking about just completely cutting or mostly cutting Whiteside out of the rotation entirely. I don't know what the political dynamic of that'll be, but he only played.
No, you can't do that.
Well, I'm saying he only played 15 minutes in this game. Whiteside did. So it's not like he played a ton of minutes. So Adebayo played 10. I would expect to see something like that moving forward. I don't see Whiteside getting more minutes. He's just not good enough as a scorer on the interior to really warrant that, and he's not giving you anything. I mean, he started on Dario Saric, and the Sixers can just run him off screens, and there's absolutely no chance in hell he's keeping up.
But yeah, and here's the thing. If Miami does advance, Hassan Whiteside's actually going to be incredibly useful against Boston, because Boston continues to play multiple big men. I do trust that Brad Stevens will probably go away from that a little bit more, play a little bit more Horford at the 5, but he does like to play Aaron Baines. He likes to play Greg Monroe, and they don't have enough depth right now to not do that in that circumstance. So interesting series going forward. I think maybe for me, that is probably the most interesting series now, the Miami-Philadelphia one, because I can see so many different variables happening here. Philadelphia has the best player for sure in Ben Simmons, and I tend to be someone who thinks that in a lot of cases, especially given the play that we've seen from Simmons already in the playoffs, he's not shy of the moment. I think that I tend to trust Philadelphia to figure this out, but again, Miami is home court now. This is a totally different series. Let's move on. Let's talk about Utah and Oklahoma City now. Utah-Oklahoma City was a weird game 1, and in a lot of ways it was an even weirder game 2, because I thought that Utah mostly controlled this game up until a 19-0 run from Oklahoma City kind of pushed it into a circumstance where it looked like Oklahoma City could run away with it in the fourth quarter. And then in the fourth quarter, the big three from Oklahoma City just totally fell apart in every single way. Like, they didn't really know how to play with each other, and they didn't make shots, and they were a total mess in terms of their offensive execution. And Utah took full advantage of that. And Donovan Mitchell had 13 fourth quarter points. He goes for 28 points, 6 rebounds on 10 of 25 shooting. He's now one of 2 players all time to go for at least 27 points in both of his first 2 playoff games, along with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So what did you think of this game as it kind of unfolded in this strange manner?
It was definitely a weird game. I thought Derek Favors was huge in this game. We talked about his matchup with Carmelo in the first, just not necessarily the individual matchup all the time, but just those 2 players and looking at them as a proxy for how their teams do. Favors tonight, 20 points, 16 rebounds, 8 offensive rebounds. He was a monster on the offensive glass in the first quarter because Steven Adams got in foul trouble. I thought he made some really awesome short roll passes, worked well with Gobert. They had a couple high lows that were really awesome. They can do big-to-big passing pretty well. They have a good feel for each other. Also hit 2 corner threes. This is basically the best version of Derek Favors you can possibly get in a playoff game, and it was a huge game for him to have this game.
Yeah, I thought he was their best player to be honest. Now, like, Donovan Mitchell is their most important player, and Rudy Gobert is also incredibly important to what they do because of his importance defensively inside. Gobert actually drew a ton of fouls on Steven Adams. Adams ended up fouling out of this game, if I remember correctly. So,
correct.
Like, he actually was incredibly important as well. But Derek Favors was awesome in this game. Just in every way. Knocked down 2 threes. As you mentioned, he owned the offensive glass when Adams went down with foul trouble. And defensively, I feel like they've actually played a little bit better with multiple bigs on the court this series. They've actually been really good in those lineups. So I'm really kind of intrigued to see kind of how Oklahoma City tries to adjust to that, because, you look at this Favors, Gobert, Joe Ingles, Donovan Mitchell, Ricky Rubio lineup that they start. That lineup now has played 34 minutes in this series, which is quite a bit of time, obviously. And they have a 9.1 net rating. And that's the lineup that's going to start, and that's the lineup that's going to close for Utah. And to have that kind of rating is really impressive, I think. And it shows how almost dominant they've been in many ways. And you look at how they have performed against Oklahoma City starting lineup of Steven Adams, Carmelo Anthony, Corey Brewer, Paul George, Russell Westbrook. That lineup has a negative 6.4 net rating. So Utah's starters right now are outperforming Oklahoma City starters. And that is something that I feel like would have been a relatively shocking statement coming into this series.
It's definitely a little bit surprising for sure. And I think some of the Favors optimism is because I don't think they've gotten the requisite play that they hope for from a Jay Crowder in this series. I don't think he's been impactful at all. Jerebko played better defensively tonight than he did in game one, but I still think that their 2-big lineup is the best lineup for them in this series, especially if the Thunder are going to roll out lineups with like Jeremy Grant combined with like Patrick Patterson and backup units. Patterson didn't play a ton tonight, but if they're going to play like 2 bigs or 2 like non-shooting bigs themselves, I would just roll out a bigger lineup because Utah's going to have that advantage there. So
the other thing is too, while you kind of bring that up, I'm going to stop you there. The Corey Brewer factor is kind of big too, because you can kind of hide someone on Corey Brewer a lot.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a great point.
Continue though. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, I think this is just my pure observation from tonight, but in game one, it seemed like Ricky Rubio took a lot of pull-up shots and some of them off balance and pick and roll. I thought tonight he really got going as a catch-and-shoot shooter, and that's where I want him. I don't want him taking pull-up jump shots, especially like leaning mid-range shots. Those are low-percentage looks. I want Mitchell to do that if he has to. And then Rubio, 5 of 8 from 3 tonight, 22 points on 16 shots. You'll take that and run with it. 22, 7, and 9 for Rubio tonight. He was fantastic.
Well, what that did, too, is it opened up his ability to drive as well, because guys started to close out on him a little bit harder, and we know how incredible of a passer he is. He ends up going for 9 assists versus only 3 turnovers, 7 rebounds as well. He's an incredible defensive rebounder for a point guard, too. If you're getting 22, 9, and 7 from Ricky Rubio, you have to feel great about his performance in that game. And, the closer was Donovan Mitchell. Like Donovan had zero fear of going up against Russell Westbrook. He had absolutely zero fear. And it was incredible to watch him. He kind of dominated Russ at the end. It was awesome.
He couldn't throw a rock in the ocean from deep, but starting at the very end of the third quarter onto the fourth, he was just getting to the rim. He was like, screw it. I'm going to the basket. I'm going to shoot floaters. I'm going to get all the way to the rim. I'm going to draw fouls. And he pulled it out for them. I thought that they really needed his extra scoring push down the stretch because that's who they turn to. They don't have another guy that does what he can do. And he's delivered for a rookie. We keep saying this, but it's kind of unfathomable that somebody keeps delivering in basically every situation he's asked to for his age. It's just phenomenal. He did outplay. I thought he outplayed Russ tonight for the most part. That shouldn't happen. That's incredible.
What do we think about this series going forward now back to Utah? Again, Utah is going to have the home court advantage the rest of the way. 3 home games at Utah, 2 in Oklahoma City. I am a little bit worried about Oklahoma City in terms of their connectedness, I would say. Tonight was it showed what happens when Paul George isn't going. I think that this game portrayed that he is probably their most important player in this series and maybe in the playoffs in general.
I agree with that because Westbrook, I think there is some credence to the fact that Gobert negates a lot of what he wants to do, getting to the basket. Just Gobert sitting back there on those drop coverages. I don't think Russell wants to go against him. So I think that does put more emphasis on George in this series as far as his shooting ability, off screens, off moving over the top. And yeah, he wasn't lights out tonight and they lost. I think that he is the driving force, at least in this series, for the Thunder, and it's hard to rely on that kind of shooting output every night. I mean, if anybody's capable of it, it's definitely Paul George, but you look around, it's like, I don't even think the Jazz are getting optimum performances from some guys. Like, I know Ingles isn't a creator, but I expect him to shoot better. He's gotten open corner looks, and that guy's a knockdown shooter, and he was 1 of 4 tonight from 3. He's going to have a big shooting game in Utah, I think. So I don't know what the Thunder really do. I think this series is going to go the distance. Honestly, I think it could go 6-7 games. It wouldn't surprise me at all because both teams have certain advantages, especially if Favors plays well. Who knows if he's going to play this well in the future. But yeah, I'm kind of puzzled as to the result of this. I don't really feel strongly leaning either way here.
Yeah, and the Ingles point is interesting because he's been swallowed up by Paul George in both of these games. They took him out early in the third quarter and brought him back late in the third quarter to try and get him away from Paul George a little bit, and I thought that kind of helped a little bit. If you look at his, he was still a plus 21 in this game because he ends up playing basically the whole way down the stretch, if I remember correctly, and they were incredible down the stretch. But it's interesting to see how they've basically just designated Paul George as the guy who's going to take Ingles out of this series and kind of not had him guard Donovan Mitchell really all that much.
It's definitely different. It's an interesting choice. I think Paul George guarded Mitchell when probably Ingles was out of the game in the first half, and I thought that George actually gave Mitchell some problems with his length, like reaching in some of these drives that Mitchell was attempting. I'm curious to see if they employ that strategy moving forward. I get trying to take Ingles away. He is the Jazz best three-point threat, and you don't want to put like a Corey Brewer on him who lapses much more off the ball. I think George is much more consistent as far as his mental approach. But at the same time, at a certain point, maybe they just put Paul George on Mitchell. They're like, screw it. We're not going to let this guy beat us because he has in the first 2 games. I mean, his scoring output, you got to cut that down or at least make it maybe slightly more inefficient. So many of these shots that Mitchell missed tonight, he's going to make in the future. I mean, 0 of 7 from 3. He's going to make 2 of 7. And that's going to be the difference. But I might try that approach if I'm Oklahoma City as far as putting Paul George on him.
I think especially in the fourth quarter from here on out, I would do that because Donovan's caught them now. I mean, he got hurt in the fourth quarter last game, but like Donovan really caught them in this game and was really the reason that Utah ended up making that late game comeback and winning the fourth quarter by 12 points. Donovan was the driving force there. I mean, Ricky Rubio was great, and we can talk about Gobert drawing fouls on Steven Adams, and we can talk about Derek Favors maybe being their best all-around player in this game. But if you don't have the closer, if you don't have the dude, then it doesn't really do anything. And I get that that's a very simplistic analysis, especially for what you and I tend to do on this podcast. But it's kind of what it comes down to in this series. It's almost like an adjustments versus just talent series in a lot of ways, because Quinn Snyder is going to keep tinkering. He's going to keep getting the lineups that he wants against Oklahoma City. At some point, though, if Oklahoma City starters show up and if Paul George and Russell Westbrook just decide that they want to take over the series, and I mean, it's not even a decision, but if they really just play well enough to do it like they're capable of, Utah kind of doesn't have any recourse, as we saw in the first game. They just, Paul George, for instance, can be such a matchup breaker and scheme buster that sometimes it just doesn't matter what you do.
Exactly. It's a scheme versus talent series to me. Some of the pick and roll play as far as letting these Utah bigs catch on short rolls and make decisions, I think they've actually done too well at that to really play it that way moving forward. It's just a tough omen because I do think Gobert's passing has improved a lot of late. Favors has always been an underrated passer in my opinion, so that's just another wrinkle. But like you said about dynamism as a scorer, look at Miami. I mean, with Dwayne Wade, if they don't have that down the stretch to close, I mean, that's a real thing in the playoffs. You usually need a guy that takes over a game, is like narrative-based as that sounds. And Utah has that guy in Mitchell. He's shown that over the first 2 games. He's shown that all year for the most part. So you have to start giving him the proper amount of respect, and maybe that equates to Paul George closing on him.
Well, speaking of the Utah Jazz and Joe Ingles, you know what he, as well as myself, are teaching us? It's that 66% of men lose their hair by the age of 35. The thing is, though, that when you start to notice hair loss, it's too late. If that hairline is slowly starting to move backwards, if you have any bald spots, it is already time for you to go to forhims.com. That is a one-stop shop for hair loss, skincare, sexual wellness for men. Thanks to science, baldness can be optional. Hims connects you with real doctors and medical-grade solutions to treat hair loss. Well-known generic equivalents to name brand subscriptions to help you keep your hair. This is not snake oil pills. There are no gas station counter supplements, no prescription solutions, they are prescription solutions backed by science. No waiting room, no awkward doctor visits. You can save hours by going to 4hims.com. It is so easy. You just answer a few quick questions. The doctor will review and they can prescribe you what you need. Products are shipped directly to your door. I've used the service. It is hopefully going to bring my hair back as we see going forward. I am excited to see it. And I know people it has worked for throughout the LA area. So I have confidence and I am excited to use it going forward. If you do make the purchase, my listeners get a trial month of 4Hims for just $5 today, right now, while supplies last. See the website for details. This would cost hundreds if you went to the doctor or a pharmacy. Go to 4hims.com/game theory. That's FORHIMS.com/game theory. 4hims.com/game theory. All right, let's move on. The Celtics and the Bucks, probably the most maddening series for me in many ways. So Boston wins 120-106 in game 2. They have a 2-0 lead now, going back to Milwaukee. The Bucks really just can't get their shit together in any sort of organized, tangible way. And it is incredibly frustrating to me. They wasted another awesome Giannis game. He goes for 30 points on 13 of 17 from the field. Chris Middleton goes for 25 points. If you would have told me in the beginning of this series that Chris Middleton and Giannis would average 60 points in the first 2 games combined, and they would get double-digit games from Malcolm Brogdon in both the 2 games, I would have told you there is no chance that Milwaukee did not at least split this series. I
agree with you. I mean, they've been phenomenal as far as their exploits. It's just they're not getting enough help from the ancillary guys. Like Jabari Parker has given them not only nothing, but significantly less than nothing. It's ridiculous. I mean, he's minus 29 in 24, 25 minutes in this series, has 2 points. It's just like he was guarding Horford in the post, and there was just no resistance. We talked about this on the last pod as far as he has the frame and the strength to actually make this a mismatch game where he can play offensively, he can attack closeouts and blow past these guys with his explosiveness, but he's not defending and he's not scoring. I just think that guys like that in this rotation, it's tough. I thought that Malcolm Brogdon, he was a minus 17 this game. I thought he did some really nice things on the floor. I think he's a guy that they have to try to get on the floor because Bledsoe, I mean, I know he had a productive stat line, 12, 7, 4, but I didn't think he played particularly well again. He was a little bit better than the first game, though, but that's a very, very low bar. It's just a lot. They're not getting enough contributions. Like Tony Snell is silent all game. There's just not enough guys in this team where, you know, Boston has the ancillary guys that are rolling. Like Marcus Morris comes off the bench and has an impact. Milwaukee doesn't really have anybody like that consistently.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The funniest number that I think I've seen so far has to do with the on-offs of Malcolm Brogdon and Eric Bledsoe. Brogdon is like a minus 20 or something net rating in this series in 51 minutes, and Bledsoe is like a plus 30 or something like that in the series because Bledsoe plays with Giannis and Brogdon plays with Giannis but also plays with the bench units. And if I was them, I would be running Brogdon with the starters. I'd be kind of throwing caution to the wind with the Bledsoe on-off numbers and just saying, I don't really care. We've seen how he played and he's not playing well. They look a lot more organized when Brogdon's on the floor, and he provides more of a defensive presence against Terry Rozier, and he provides more of a shooting presence right now than what Milwaukee is getting from Eric Bledsoe. He at least has a sense of gravity, even though he's only shooting like 30% from 3 so far. Teams at least feel like they have to guard him. I know that Boston at times is letting him shoot in certain lineups. He's kind of the guy that they're designating, okay, we're going to let you go whenever they actually have spacers on the floor. But in lineups where there's an actual adequate amount of spacing on the floor, he's actually getting guarded and actually has a sense of gravity.
I would start him, and I would also give Sterling Brown Jabari Parker's minutes. Parker just doesn't have it right now. I don't know what he's giving you. You can try maybe a little bit more, give him one more more shot, but you're losing considerably in those minutes. He's not giving you anything of value. I'd rather have a better team defender in there who can also knock down an open three if Parker's not going to score. So you just look down the bench in this game. Maker came in really late. Those guys don't count. Shabazz Muhammad gave them a nice scoring punch in the first half, but I don't think that's sustainable. Honestly, over the course of a series, I wouldn't count on Shabazz Muhammad giving you legitimate minutes. Jason Terry only played 5 minutes in this game. Dellavedova 5 minutes. They don't have anybody, like depth-wise, that's really giving them much. So I think they got to try to do what you said, move Brogdon into the starters and just try to win those minutes, and then just try to salvage on your second unit. Get a guy like Sterling Brown in your rotation where he knows where to be defensively, at least for the most part, and see if you can kind of tighten the gaps, because Boston's ancillary guys are just killing Milwaukee's right now.
So you bring up the Jabari point, and I tend to be a Jabari defender, so I will do that now. Jabari's minutes in this series are coming with him as like a third big man for the most part. Like in this game, in his first stint, they were playing him with both Giannis and Henson, which is just bananas to me. Like it's totally crazy to do that. I hate it in every single way. Joe Prunty's lineups in this series have been so maddeningly terrible that it's incredibly frustrating. Like the fact that they allowed them to play Giannis, Jabari, Henson in a front court against a Boston front court with Greg Monroe on it is insane. Go all space when Monroe's on the floor. Just space him out and force him to guard out there. You can't do that when those three are on the floor together. And then the funniest thing that happened in this entire game, it happened at the beginning of the second quarter. Bledsoe, Shabazz, Tony Snell, Giannis, and John Henson were on the floor together. So the zero space lineup. That, like, the worst lineup I think that they could possibly construct. By the way, they went on a 13-0 run with this lineup out there, and it was all because Boston threw out Yabusele and Greg Monroe in the front court, knowing that, like, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. But as this Bledsoe, Shabazz, Tony Snell, Giannis, Henson lineup is out there, Joe Prunty is getting a sideline interview. And he goes, yeah, we got to get our spacing right. And I was like, are you kidding me? What is this lineup? Like, if you're talking about we got to get our spacing right with this, how do you expect that to happen? You just can't. And it's like they're insane and just doing the same things over and over again, the same failures over and over again, and not adjusting to what Boston is actually susceptible to. Like with lineups where Aaron Baines is on the floor and where Greg Monroe is on the floor, you should be spreading them out and going spread, pick, and roll.
The thing is, they're not attacking him that way, though. Like, if they did try to go small, I think to start the fourth quarter, they had Middleton at the 4. He was actually guarding, I want to say he was trying to guard Monroe, and Giannis was at the 5. He was guarding Horford or Baines. So they went super small, and they're like, screw it, we're going to try to space these guys out. But they didn't actually do it right offensively, and then they were getting bludgeoned inside. Like, Middleton cannot guard Monroe in the post. No. Like, there's just no chance. Like, Monroe was killing him. I think he missed, or he juggled one ball out of bounds, but overall, that's not a sustainable approach. But if you go that route, which they might have to do, you have to take advantage offensively. You can't put out no spacing lineups, and you can't not run plays that effectively capture, Monroe's inability to play in space. I thought that Prunty actually did some okay things in this game, using Giannis as like the roll man and clear out pick and roll a little bit. Got them some looks. It was mostly against like Yabusele. He was out of position, but I like seeing them get a little creative with Giannis as the screener, which they did a fair amount in this game, to their credit. I just don't like some of the lineup constructions. I think that Jabari, the first time he came out, he was as the 4, but he also did play with that Henson lineup with Giannis. I think he replaced Giannis that first time, and I hate that lineup. I just don't know what you're gaining by like you have to play Jabari and Giannis probably at the 4-5, and hopefully you're going to drive some mismatches. But again, if Jabari's not going to defend, you can't really get that trade-off, right? If Horford's going to beat Jabari in the post, like that makes it a tougher sell.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me. And the craziest thing is that you look at their most used lineups. They have 3 lineups that have played at least 8 minutes in this series. The top one is the starters. It's Giannis, Eric Bledsoe, John Henson, Chris Middleton, Tony Snell. That lineup has a 10.3 net rating in 25 minutes. In 8 minutes, Giannis, Eric Bledsoe, Malcolm Brogdon, John Henson, Chris Middleton, so just Brogdon for Tony Snell. That lineup has a 34 net rating. Giannis, Eric Bledsoe, Sterling Brown, John Henson, Chris Middleton, so Sterling Brown for Tony Snell. That lineup has a 15.9 net rating. All of them are performing pretty well offensively. So I just look at the fact that these 4 starter units, these Antetokounmpo, Bledsoe, Henson, Middleton lineups are performing really well. It's everything else that is failing miserably. It is everything else that has just become a total mess for Milwaukee, and I think that falls on the coach because he can't figure out how to put together competent lineups whenever Giannis sits, whenever Eric Bledsoe even sits.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I think that has to be where the series is swayed. That has to be the swing point as far as before, like coming into this series, I thought that Henson was going to be the liability, and the numbers are just not showing that. I don't think that Henson's doing anything spectacular on the floor, but he's at least a presence inside. I mean, he's going to get boxed. He doesn't have a great frame, but at least he can protect the rim a little bit. And, despite the fact he reacts slowly to some drives, he at least is a body out there, which they can't really replicate. Like, they're going to get killed on the boards. I mean, in this game, it didn't really seem that way from the final stat line, but there were so many opportunities I thought that the Celtics created on the offensive glass. And, that's what Stevens is going for. Like, he's playing some of these bigger units that, frankly, I didn't totally expect to see. I know they're short on guys, so that's probably part of the driving force here, but using Baines 24 minutes, Horford plays 35. They're going some 2 big lineups, and they're really trying to take advantage of Milwaukee's biggest weakness, which is their interior defensive play.
Well, I think that it's pretty clear Milwaukee's biggest weakness is on the sidelines right now.
Second biggest weakness.
Yeah. We'll talk about Milwaukee and their impending coaching decision later on, probably next week. Whenever they're eliminated, it seems like the series is 2-0, and Boston is just so much more organized than they are. They are playing an actual defensive scheme that doesn't continually break down. You look at, what they're doing with John Henson is hilarious. Like they're just saying, oh yeah, we're gonna let you catch the ball from 15 feet and in. It doesn't matter. We don't think you can do anything with it. Now, what they started to do is they started to use Henson a little bit as like a passing hub. He had 4 assists in this game, and I thought he actually did a pretty good job offensively in this game. But the problem is they can't defend anyone because they don't have any lineups outside of that starting unit that feel confident playing with one another.
It's a great point. The cohesion, and they've had problems with their defensive scheme all year. And against a coach like Stevens, they're going to be able to take advantage of those kinds of sets. I think we got to give the Celtics some credit, though, overall. It's just like some of the shot making in this game was phenomenal. Like Jaylen Brown coming off like down screens, hitting threes on the move. Terry Rozier's not a real person. I'm pretty convinced of that at this juncture. Al Horford was hitting fadeaways in the post. There's just so much going on. Marcus Morris, again, like we noted in the past, is he's given them 18 points in 30 minutes. He's been efficient as a scorer. He's made dynamic shots, and these guys deserve credit for their shot making.
Yeah, no, absolutely. At some point, Eric Bledsoe might want to figure out who Terry Rozier is, because Terry Rozier is kicking his ass in this series. He is dominating Eric Bledsoe, and it is.
Yes, he is.
It's bad. Like, Eric Bledsoe can't do anything against Terry Rozier. Milwaukee is in a more precarious spot going forward than I think that I thought they were with their roster. Just because Bledsoe has given them nothing. Tony Snell is now on a long-term deal, and it doesn't seem like this coaching staff knows how to utilize him. Jabari Parker is a free agent this summer. Thon Maker took a step back this year. I don't really know what to do with a lot of this roster. I think so much hinges on this coaching hire this summer. They need to knock this coaching hire out of the park in a significant way. In terms of Boston, I want to give Brad Stevens credit, but I guess he deserves some credit. But a lot of this to me is just Milwaukee has no idea what it's doing, and Brad's just taking advantage of that.
I think that's fair, but good coaches do take advantage of weaknesses. So you got to give them some credit. But I agree. There's a lot of misdirect. There's a lot of different things going on with the Bucks. I do want to see who they hire for their coach. See what they do with Jabari. We're probably going to talk about that more in the future as far as Jabari's free agency and what the hell they do there, because that's one of the most fascinating situations and predicaments that the team's going to be in this summer.
Yeah, no question there. Let's move on. Let's talk about New Orleans and Portland. This is still the series that you think is the most interesting, correct?
Yeah, I really do. It's just not only enjoyable to watch. I think it's pretty close with me in the Philadelphia series, but this one, I don't know. It just has a different flair to it, just because we have two players playing at a supremely high level. I mean, Drew Holiday's been like one of the 5 or 6 best players in the playoffs. He's been ridiculous. And then Anthony Davis, and just the style they're playing and how they're attacking the Blazers. There's a lot of scheme in this game, and there's a lot of adjustments that are necessary, which is always fun for me.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. The schemes in this series are very interesting to me in a lot of different ways. So I think we should start with New Orleans defense. The Rajon Rondo, Drew Holiday, Etuan Moore, Nikola Mirotic, Anthony Davis lineup has played 43 minutes in this series and has an 83.7 defensive rating. They are totally shutting down what Portland wants to do from their starting unit and from their closing unit. What they're doing is they're just essentially allowing Anthony Davis to sit back in coverage a bit. They'll occasionally show him up high, but for the most part, they're allowing him to just sit back in coverage and blow up every sort of passing lane and every sort of driving lane. And what it's doing is it's forcing Damian Lillard into really bad spots offensively. He's only taking 10% of his shots at the rim right now. That's down pretty substantially. He's taking 35% of his shots from mid-range right now in this series. That's up by 10% from what his season stats are. You just look at what he is typically been able to do throughout the course of the season. He is not capable of getting anywhere. In large part, that is because of the scheme that Alvin Gentry has created. It is because of what Anthony Davis brings as a game breaker defensively. And I think Nikola Mirotic and Drew Holiday deserve quite a bit of credit. I mean, Holiday is getting all of the credit because he deserves it. But Nikola Mirotic has been really underrated in the way that he's been able to sit down defensively and at least cut off penetration in a way that we haven't seen from him in the past.
Yeah, he's always been, in my opinion, kind of an underrated defender, but now it's starting to manifest a little bit playing with the 4 next to Davis, and just the scheme stuff has been really fascinating. They started Davis on Nurkic as far as defensively with some slight drops. Sometimes they're hard hedge, but mostly Davis is dropping back a little bit because he can still contest pull-ups by Dame and CJ, and you have the kind of guard defense that can get over the top of screens and apply pressure. But what I liked by Gentry in this game is he actually switched that up. He moved Davis to Aminu, and he was just kind of sagging off and blowing up absolutely everything as a help defender, which was really fascinating to me because they were like, okay, we're going to put Mirotic on Nurkic, and then we're going to have Davis kind of floating in the back line just around the paint, so it just shuts down absolutely everything. So there's some cat and mouse here too. I thought that was a really interesting move, though. I mean, Aminu was 4 of 6 and 3 in this game. He had 14 points. So, I mean, he did knock down some open shots, but overall, I think you'll live with that. If you can cut off the head of the snake and you can take away a lot of what Dame and CJ want to do, I think that's the move.
Yeah, I mean, once you take away what CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard do, where does Portland go to the well? What do they do offensively? I think that you're seeing that. Evan Turner has been a disaster in this series. He's a guy that can at least create, but he goes 0 of 6 in this game. In the first game, he was not much better. He went 6 of 15 and really just turned the ball over 4 times. He was even worse somehow in that game and more harmful in that game. I just don't know what Portland does if CJ and Dame don't start shooting well. Damian is a little bit more concerning to me because I know that New Orleans is specifically taking him away. CJ is just missing open shots. He went 9 for 21 in this game, which isn't crazy far off of his season average. 3 for 8 from 3, which isn't crazy far off his season average. But he missed a lot of open looks in this game too that he needs to start hitting, or else the series is over.
They can't survive without them too at a high level. I think they can make adjustments, though. We've seen Mo Harkless played in this game, played 27 minutes, had 11 points. He was plus 10. He hit all 5 of his shots. You have to put him in the starting lineup. Get him there for Evan Turner. Turner's killing them. He has no shooting gravity. The Pelicans don't guard him. They don't care if he shoots. You also have to mix and match your 5s now. I think you have to go to the well here. You have to look at a guy like Zach Collins as a starter. They cannot play their conservative pick and roll drops game if we're going to transition to New Orleans offensively against Anthony Davis. They're just going to pick and pop. Davis is either going to shoot or he has the agility to blow right past Nurkic. It's just not going to work. There's no way that Nurkic can survive in this series against Davis at the 5. Few 5s can. He certainly can't. I would either start Aminu at the 5, and I would play him against Davis, or I would start Zach Collins, who I think has actually played pretty decent basketball. Like he's not proficient yet on threes. He was 2 of 7 in this game, but he did show some proclivity to attack closeouts and at least put pressure on the defense. Even if he misses the layup, he missed one. Like it's a Kobe assist, so there's a putback attempt. So I would try to mix and match. I don't think Nurkic is the answer, though.
So this is what's really hard about playoff series, right? Because the Blazers' conservative defensive scheme in a lot of ways is built around funneling teams toward contested shots at the rim and toward mid-range jump shots. In a lot of ways, what they do is pretty okay with Anthony Davis shooting mid-range jumpers. The problem is that if Yusuf Nurkic comes out wild on closeouts, Davis is going to blow by him, kind of like what you said. But the other problem is, I think changing your entire defensive scheme, because that's what they would have to do. They would have to change all of their defensive coverages in a pretty substantial way. That's a lot harder than what you would expect. Like especially whenever that scheme, in a lot of ways, especially given their defensive personnel, is what made them a top 10 defense in the regular season. I mean, this has actually been a really good defensive year for Terry Stotts. I think he's done a great job of developing a scheme around relatively deficient defenders in Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum and Evan Turner, and even Nurkic sometimes is okay, but for the most part I would say is more of a negative given the slowness of his feet, I guess. It's harder, I think, to just kind of freewheel and decide, okay, we're going to play more aggressive now. That's at some point you have to have an identity too, and I think it's hard to change your entire identity, but that's kind of what it seems like they have to do because it's a really poor matchup. That's
exactly the point, is the matchup is dictating what they have to do. And it's not just Anthony Davis on pick and pops. It's Drew Holiday putting these smaller guards in jail because they're trailing over the top. That's the whole point. And Holiday he has the size to just wait patiently, keep him on his back, and then create an advantage situation. So it's him too. And it's just a really bad matchup, honestly, for Portland, how it's materialized so far. I agree. It's hard to change your identity on the fly. You don't want to, start hard hedging and all these rotations. You have to practice that stuff throughout the year and throughout the offseason. Maybe they just start switching everything. They have to try something because what they're doing right now is not working. Holiday is absolutely murdering them. 33 points in this game, 9 assists. He's been the best guard in this series by a country mile. Yeah. And that can't happen when they should have the 2 best guards. Well, I mean, Holiday's played great down the stretch of the season, of course, but Portland in theory should probably have the 2 best guards in this series, and they have not been the 2 best guards. So I think you have to mix and match. You have to make adjustments because what you're doing right now, it's just not going to work. It's not going to, if you profile it and project it moving forward, I don't know, it's not like there's the Pelicans are going to stop performing. It's Davis is an elite kind of pick and pop, pick and dive guy, and if you give him these opportunities, Holiday can perform in the structure as well. He can keep guys in jail. He has the size. So I don't necessarily see their play dropping off a cliff. They're just out executing because the scheme is so conducive to what they want to do.
Well, it's that too, and it's the fact that Portland's defenders just in general have not been good at the point of attack, and I think that a place where you see that is with Rajon Rondo more than you see it with Drew Holiday. Rajon Rondo is getting penetration basically whenever he wants, and it's kind of opening up the rest of their offense because Rondo is so good at probing and finding little creases, but he's also been very decisive in this series in a way that I think has been very beneficial. He hasn't pounded the ball on the ground. He's mostly kept it moving the whole way because Portland's defense, if you're not good at the point of attack and the conservative kind of drop back defender and screen and rolls has to step up, it causes a lot of problems and it causes a lot of rotational issues. And that's what you're seeing with Rajon Rondo. He's taken so much advantage of it. And then going back to Portland's offense for a second, it seemed like early in this game they wanted to try and establish Yusuf Nurkic in a pretty significant manner. And I hate that idea because he didn't even play super poorly, I don't think. But he ends up with 6 points in 8 shooting possessions. And in his first run of 7 minutes, he had 6 points, 2 offensive rebounds on, I think it was 8 shots and a turnover, and he was blocked 3 times. So even when he plays well, you're still talking about a 1 point per possession option in Nurkic, and that's just not valuable against this Portland team, or against this New Orleans team. I'm sorry.
Exactly. And I think that Portland has to just kind of have to try to outscore the Pelicans in this and get more spacing on the floor and trust their dynamism as creators. They have more on-ball creator types than the Pelicans do. I mean, the Pelicans' best player is a big. He's not going to have the same kind of advantages to dictate as an initiator as Portland does. So I think they got to get more spacing on the floor. They got to open this game up a little bit. That's why I think they should go make that. We talked about this last time as far as pick and roll. The Pelicans do blitz Damian sometimes, or trap, however you want to define it. Yeah. Not as much, but they do still. And I want that popping threat in there. I want Zach Collins in there, so they make him pay for that. If you just have Jusuf Nurkic in there, they can easily recover because he's not going to pop. He's going to dive, and they're going to have help there, especially when Evan Turner's in the game. So spread the game out. Get some better looks for your guards. I think that's how they have to win the series.
Yeah, I mean, I think I generally agree with you. I do want to point out something, too, though. Zach Collins and Ed Davis in this series, when they've been on the floor together, I've really liked that pairing. They have a plus 24.6 net rating. And then I would also point to, the Zach Collins lineup whenever he plays with Ed Davis and Damian Lillard. They have a 31 net rating in this series. I wonder if the move is more you go toward CJ, Dame, Aminu, Ed Davis, Zach Collins, and you go super big across the front. Aminu can guard whoever they're going to play at the three. Like, I'm not real worried about Aminu having to roam against each one more and kind of letting him crush things defensively. And I think the size might actually kind of cause some issues for New Orleans.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I'd be down with that. I mean, I just think they have to do something. I mean, if that lineup's going to work, I think that Collins and Ed Davis do conceptually fit well. Davis kind of knows his role, crashing into the glass, and you can have Collins popping. Collins plays a lot of de facto 4 next to him. So, yeah, I believe with that. I think that Harkless, again, is someone they have to really try to get into the lineup because I don't know what their lineup data is this year, but him paired with Aminu just gives them advantages as far as covering ground at the 3 and the 4. So I like that dynamic too, but I would definitely try to work in that lineup that you suggested and have that replace a guy like Nurkic, where I just don't think this is the series where you can really take advantage of him unless you play him and stagger him in minutes that Davis isn't in there and you have like Check Diallo or something that comes in for minutes as a backup unit. Then you can play Nurkic and try to maybe take advantage of him in the post or something, but I don't think he can be on the floor when Davis is.
Another sneaky guy that I think has been pretty decent is Pat Connaughton in this series. Yeah. He's given them a bit of athleticism, but more than that, he's just spacing the floor and passing well and keeping the ball moving. I like the Portland bench units a decent amount. I just wonder if there's a way to kind of integrate the starter units with the bench units and kind of move on from Evan Turner and Jusuf Nurkic and try and get different lineups there.
For sure. And I think just 2 more notes on the Pelicans. I mean, Rondo blowing by Lillard way too often. I think Lillard has to take more pride in his defense. There was just some open space opportunities where Lillard had terrible closeouts. Why are you closing out hard to Rajon Rondo? Like, you want him to shoot the ball. I mean, I know he went 2 or 3 from 3 in this game, but that's the shot you live with. You don't want him getting to the rim and breaking down your defense and putting pressure on the rim. And then again, Nikola Mirotic, just his off-screen shooting, his ability there, I think that's going to be a different dynamic that Portland has to deal with. I mean, this is just what we were talking about all season with Anthony Davis at the 5. You get a shooter like Mirotic, you can also defend in space a little bit. It's a tremendously difficult guard when you can't make those guys pay in ways that the Blazers are not able to right now.
Yeah, Rajon Rondo, 16 points, 10 rebounds, 9 assists in game 2. Drew Holiday was ridiculous as well. I feel like we haven't said that enough. We've said it enough over the course of the first 2 games, but we have not said it enough on this podcast yet. He's just been the best guard, I think, in the entire playoffs so far. He is dominating Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum whenever he's matched up with him as well. He is just creating off the bounce and finding teammates with ease and pick and rolls. He is knocking down shots on his own. He's driving, blowing by Evan Turner, blowing by McCollum, just kind of putting Dame in jail whenever he wants to in pick and rolls. He's been unbelievable.
And he's doing it on both ends. I think that's worth noting. Is like he's playing at a high level on both sides of the floor, which is really hard for an initiator to do. And he's doing that as a guard. Like, his defense has been elite. His offense has been elite. Like, shooting, getting to the rim, finishing with his left. He's doing everything right now. He's playing like a man on fire. I mean, I know that's kind of lame, but he literally is playing like that.
Let's move on. Let's talk about Toronto and Washington. We're going to do these last 3 series, I think, relatively quickly, just because there's not a whole lot of excitement there. The Raptors won 130-119. They were up 17 in the first quarter, 18 at halftime. Washington made a bit of a push late with John Wall just going crazy and going ham, along with Mike Scott playing really well. He had 20 points in this game, but I'm still yet to see anything that says Washington isn't a disorganized mess and Toronto isn't just incredibly well organized and actually has an identity and knows what they're doing.
John Wall's just not getting enough help, man. I mean, he wasn't great in the first half last night, but he was awesome in the second half. He was so good down the stretch. Like, he was everywhere. He was getting into the paint. He was making plays defensively as far as rotating over, challenging shots at the rim. He's just not getting enough help from other guys. Like, Bradley Beal is what, like a minus 44 overall in the series now? That's not getting it done. Like, he just he's no-showed. I don't know if he's ran out of gas or whatnot, but in game 2, he was not a factor at all. 3 of 11 from the floor. They need that secondary presence. I think they could run some more actions for Otto Porter. I just don't see him involved enough in the offense. Like, they tried to do that out of the gate last night. They ran that cross-screen pick and roll 3-5 where Gortat sprinted across. It got Porter an open jump shot because the Wizards are going to attack Valanciunas with dribble handoffs or pick and roll whenever he's on the floor. That's how they create a lot of their offense. Unfortunately, a lot of it's mid-range. But they just need more ancillary help. Like, Markieff Morris was horrendous last night. Like, absolutely horrendous defensively, the point of attack, as far as containing. His closeouts were poor. His rim protection was poor. He's given them nothing. We talked about this off air, but honestly, Mike Scott and Ty Lawson were like the second, third best players on the team last night behind Wall. Like, that can't happen.
Yeah, I think that the biggest problem for Washington has been the starting unit in general, just not getting it done. If you were to tell me that John Wall, Bradley Beal, Otto Porter, Markieff Morris, and Marcin Gortat were a minus 36 net rating in the series, I would say that Washington has zero chance. Just straight up, this is a team that has gotten more out of their starting unit than just about anybody over the course of the last 3 years, and their bench guys just aren't good enough. Mike Scott has played incredibly well, and Ty Lawson has played well last night, at least in 30 minutes, but I don't want to trust those guys going forward. They need to play better, and that starts with Bradley Beal. He needs to not have 9 points on 11 shooting possessions. Like, he just can't do that.
And Kelly Oubre, I know it says he has 14 points with 5 rebounds. Like, he lapsed so many times defensively. Like, he had a closeout where he closed out to somebody, and he didn't even put his arm up. He was in position. It's like there's too many blunders with him, like in the mental game, that I just don't trust. And he needed to be that swing piece in this series. If they can go smaller, put him out there. And like, Mike Scott right now is like their best center option because Markieff is not doing anything. If you can put Mike Scott and put more length around him, more mobility, put Oubre next to him with like Otto Porter, and that lineup can survive. I think that can be interesting against the Raptors because you could probably try to play Valanciunas off the floor. There's just too much shooting, and then you get like a Ibaka at the 5. So they just need like the secondary stars like Beal, Porter to step up more, but they also need a couple contributions from guys like Oubre who just bring more value than a guy like Mike Scott can with his two-way play.
Couple of random Toronto notes. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention how good DeMar DeRozan was in this game. He is a very, very professional scorer. He is the kind of creator, now at least in the playoffs, who you can trust to do whatever he needs to. He is the kind of game-breaking piece that every playoff team needs, and that he hasn't been able to provide them over the course of the last few years in the playoffs, but he's morphed into that piece now, and I like what Kyle Lowry has done, kind of filling in the cracks around him. I like what CJ Miles has done, just knocking down shots when he's open. DeLon Wright has been awesome in this series. He has been ridiculous, kind of filling in for Fred VanVleet with a lot of those starting units late in games. I am a huge fan of everything I've seen from this Toronto team.
I agree. And DeRozan has been really impressive to me. I mean, his catching off the hop on threes, being aggressive and assertive as a spot-up shooter. He had one screen rejection last night where John Wall tried to, like, jump the gap, and DeRozan crossed him over and got to the rim. And it was ridiculous. Like, he's playing at such a high level right now, and that's the creating type of player that they need, but he can also play off the ball more easy now. So that makes their offense hum a little bit more. OG was fine last night. I thought that his defense, he had some awesome defensive stints on John Wall. Like this one where Wall dropped his shoulder against him. He absorbed the bump and then still blocked the shot. He sat down defensively against Bradley Beal and then forced an air ball. So they're getting contributions from him. I just like, again, how many guys they have that are playoff caliber players. Like CJ Miles has been phenomenal for them, knocking down shots. He can play both sides a little bit. And then Dylan Wright can guard, three positions, and he's a playmaker. He's a confident shooter, even though he's not like a very, very established one yet, but he's at least capable from range, and he gets to the rim. They just have a lot of guys who can play playoff basketball. Like Norman Powell would be like a rotation player on a lot of playoff teams, and they don't really even need him because they have guys in front of him who can fill the same role.
Can you imagine how important Norman Powell would be to a team like Minnesota right now?
Yes. Very integral.
Yeah, like he would be probably their first player off the bench right now. Speaking of Minnesota, they're now down 0-2. Houston up 2-0. They've held home court. They won by 20 in game 2. I mean, the story for me, I guess we have to start with Chris Paul because he was just a god in this game. He was unbelievable. But the next story for me is that Karl Towns is basically no-showed in these games. 5 points tonight and 10 rebounds. In the first game, I think he had 9 points. It was just an ugly, ugly game from Karl Towns in both games.
It's really bizarre to me. I think a lot of it is Houston's defense and Minnesota's offense, conversely, and just not getting him in the right positions to succeed. Like especially in the first game where he just didn't get enough looks. They didn't play like Wiggins shot. They just didn't get enough quality looks for Towns. But some of the stuff, I just think that he needs to put the ball on the floor a little bit more. He's settling a little bit too much, in my opinion, but he's also not being done a lot of favors. Like there was a play tonight where he had the ball on the strong side block, and Jimmy Butler relocated to the corner and just brought help right into Towns' lap. And so he had to deal with a double team with 2 seconds left on the clock. Like he's not being done any favors, I don't think, by the Minnesota roster construction and just how they're attempting to play. But he can't have 5 points and 10 rebounds in a playoff game when he's there. He's the second most important player. So I think you have to give Houston credit because I think Capella is an underrated defender. He's done some good things on him, but overall, you just have to have more.
Yeah, I think that part of this is that Towns is being defended really well by Houston, who is kind of sold out to stop him in a lot of ways. I also think part of this is he's settling, and I don't think he is quite as strong through his lower half is what we thought he was, maybe. Like, he doesn't establish position as well as what he gets credit for in the post. Like, he ends up establishing position 12 feet out as opposed to 8 feet out. And I think it makes his life a little bit more difficult as a scorer whenever that's the case, especially when he has a propensity to settle for those fadeaway 12-footers against a guy like Nene, who he should be able to kind of go forward against instead of backward.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of people view that as maybe a lack of physicality, but maybe it's just a lack of girth, frankly. But I think the
lack of strength. Bob Voulgaris brought this up on Twitter, and Bob's great, I think. But he has a dad bod already, and that's scary. I think it's a legitimate concern.
I just think the overall difference in approach of this game, the two teams can be personified in the amount of 3-point attempts. I mean, Minnesota took 18 total threes. The Rockets took 52. I know the Rockets are mad men when it comes to threes, but that's an enormous gap to have, and that just goes to kind of the approach. I thought Jeff Teague did a pretty decent job in the first quarter of getting to the rim, but especially in 1-5 pick and roll, because that's the one thing they're not going to switch likely. I mean, sometimes Houston will design where Harden will guard the ball handler, so he'll switch on to Towns and kind of fight him off position. So Houston does a little bit of that to negate Towns, but having a Teague 1-5 pick and roll, that's not going to be the recipe for sustainable offense to beat the Rockets. They need more from Butler, they need more from Towns, and they need more from Wiggins.
Yeah, I was going to say, what have you thought of Andrew Wiggins in this series? Because on one hand, I actually think he's been very aggressive on the boards. I think he's been very aggressive in trying to play within a team concept, but the scoring efficiency is just a killer for them, especially against Houston.
Yeah, in his role, he just has to shoot threes, and 0 of 3 tonight. He's got to provide more of a spacing gravity threat. I thought he played actually pretty good defense in the first quarter. He tried. I thought he made some nice deflections. He made some nice energy plays on one entry inside. And even Towns played a little bit harder defensively than he gets credit for in the first quarter, and then it dropped off a cliff. But there's not – I think the problem with those two guys is consistency. I mean, Towns can score usually consistently, so when that's not going, that's kind of an anomaly. And that, again, give some credit to the Rockets here. But mental consistency on both sides of the floor is something that both Wiggins and Towns have always struggled with.
Yeah, James Harden played like trash in this game. He was 2 of 18 from the field. But it didn't matter because Chris Paul showed up, and Chris Paul had 27 points, 8 assists. He had these ridiculous teardrop floaters. He had twisting finishes in the lane. He knocked down 3 threes. Was just dropping dimes in transition for guys like Gerald Green in the bench unit where they kind of blew this open. Just a ridiculous performance. It was like the Chris Paul to AT performance for everyone who bitches about how he never shows up in the playoffs. It was perfect.
I was going to say, it was a giant F you to all those people in game 1 when he made that ridiculous transition pass at the end of the game. I was even like grabbing my hair there. But overall, I mean, this is like one of the best point guards of all time. So it's good to see him shine in a big setting just because there's so many people who still like doubt his overall body of work, even though it's ridiculous to doubt that. But as far as playoff performance and success in the playoffs, people want to see rings. So it's good to see him perform in the moment for sure.
Who does this team want to see in the next round, Utah or Oklahoma City?
That's a really fascinating question. What do you think about that? I haven't thought enough about it to really give a reasoned opinion yet, but I don't know.
I think I would rather see Utah if I was them, because I think that what Utah does really, really well defensively in terms of protecting the rim and kind of getting out on shooters, I think Houston's just going to kind of break that with their shooting ability.
I think the key is probably Gobert and then Houston's proclivity to run a lot of pick and roll and dragging him out of the lane. So that's a good point. I mean, overall, Oklahoma City, if their stars are going, that's always a frightening construct. But like we even said, I guess Russell Westbrook is a much better matchup for him because Capella is not the same caliber rim protector as Gobert. So I think Westbrook will be more active getting to the rim. So yeah, I'd say probably if I was the Rockets, I'd rather see Utah just because overall I think they have less dynamism. And I think that the Rockets, three-point shooting, they're initiators who can shoot at a high level off the dribble and give Gobert problems.
Yeah, they went 3-0 against Utah and 1-2 against Oklahoma City in the regular season. So I think Utah is who they'd rather play. Last series here, Spurs and Warriors. I'll be honest, I watched very little of this game. This is just not an interesting series from any sort of schematic perspective. Golden State has probably like 5 of the 6 best players in this series, even without Stephen Curry.
Yeah. There isn't really much to say about this. The Spurs adjusted. They inserted Rudy Gay into the starting lineup in place of Kyle Anderson because they needed scoring. They can run like a 3-5 or 4-5 in their case, pick and roll with Aldridge, and Rudy Gay can get to a mid-range pull-up, and that's a source they need for their offense because otherwise they're just totally relying on Aldridge in the post because they don't really have anybody else that can create off the dribble. Like Patty Mills can shoot off the dribble, but he's not really like the kind of like get to the rim guard that you need. They just don't have the horses, man. Like the Spurs, just with Kawhi, they present problems because they have more two-way guys, of course, but they just don't have the requisite personnel. Like again, Iguodala started guarding DeJounte Murray, and as a help defender, if Iguodala can just run around your offense, you're screwed.
Yeah. No, how this series is going poorly for San Antonio is that they have no lineup that has played more than 11 minutes in this series. They just don't know what to do against this Golden State team, and I totally get it. I don't know what to do against this Golden State team. It just sucks. Everything about this sucks for San Antonio right now.
It's really unfortunate. Of course, they've experienced a ton of success, so I'm not going to feel too bad for them because they've won like 50 games. I think the streak was like 18 years in a row or something ridiculous. I can't remember what the exact stat was, but their sustainable success is it hasn't been mirrored by basically any other franchise, but they are definitely short on gunpowder here as far as competing with the Warriors and even like a Steph Curry-less Warriors, because I think that what Kerr did in the starting lineup going big was really smart.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting kind of deal here with San Antonio. I can't believe that they're 3.5-point underdogs in Game 3. That is a totally bananas line to me. But Cole, I think we're going to call it. Tell the people where we can find your work.
As usual, on thestepian.com, I just wrote 2 really long pieces recapping the Nike Hoop Summit, one piece for the world team and one for the U.S. team. So you'll see popular prospects in the next draft class, guys like R.J. Barrett, Cam Reddish. Broke those guys down pretty intricately, so intel throughout the weekend practices, and then, of course, the Friday scrimmage. So check that out, and then continue to tune into this podcast.
Yeah, Cole's going to be on a little bit more regularly here as we get throughout the playoffs. Another thing I just wanted to point out, because I know that Cole loves this player unconditionally, Zaire Smith is in the draft for good now.
Let's go.
I figured that I should just kind of note that so that Cole could be very excited about it for a second here on the podcast. For people who are a little bit unfamiliar with Zaire Smith, who maybe are tuning in now just for the playoffs, do you want to kind of give a quick little 30-second deal?
Sure. He's one of the most functional athletes in the draft. Still, I think he's still 18, might have turned 19 already, but he is just 6'5", really explosive leaper. He plays really well in the team construct, so he plays in that motion scheme for Texas Tech, knows how to move without the ball. Defensively, really functional, he can switch a lot. He knows when to rotate. Really high-level instincts guy on both sides of the floor. Still far away as far as a shooter. I think he has workable mechanics, but not ideal. He really needs to improve his ball handling, but I think he can pass okay, as we saw in that Florida game. So, yeah, he's just one of the most he's one of the most intrigued. He's really intriguing in this class just because he's not established yet, but there's so much physical upside, and we rarely see a prospect with his athleticism that applies it in this way on the floor.
Yes, that's the key. He actually knows how to use his athleticism, particularly defensively. I think that's really important. I'm a little bit lower on him than Cole is because I don't think he has the necessary offensive game right now to really make an impact. He's a smart offensive player, but isn't really a skilled one yet. He's not a confident shooter, not a confident ball handler, is a decent passer in that he'll keep the ball moving, but isn't necessarily like true playmaker either at 6'5", relatively long arms it seems like, and has an upside, but I think he's a first round pick. I think he's probably more in like the 20 range, whereas Cole has him probably around like 10, right?
Yeah, I think he's probably going to end up around 10 to 12 for me. Really quick before we get out of here, where do you think his promise came? Like what range of the draft? Because I'm assuming he got a first round promise.
I doubt that he has a promise yet. I bet that he has just been told by enough folks that he's going to be a first round pick. I would bet that he does not yet have a promise though. Like a true, first and foremost, like true promises, like we'll take you no matter what. They're very rare. I think that like the Cameron Payne to Oklahoma City one is like the normal example of it. But like even Jarrell Martin to Memphis was one that people brought up for a while, and I don't even think that was like a true promise. Like I think that they were probably going to take Tyus Jones, and then Tyus got taken or something like that. Like I think that that's the way that went down. I think that was the 2015 draft, and yeah, I think that Memphis was probably going to take Tyus, and he went one pick ahead of Jarrell Martin. So those are the weird, rumors that happen every year in the pre-draft process. And, it's not to say that none of them end up coming to fruition, because sometimes they do, but it's not like a rampant thing that I think many in the public think it is. You know what I mean?
I just love for somebody to one day go back and write a book about all these different interactions and all these so-called promises or whatnot. I'm obsessed with behind the scenes information and stuff and how all of that politically works. But I think going back to your Zaire point really quick, I think you're probably right. There's probably not a solidified promise, but there's probably a team maybe in the 20s or so that's been like, we're not going to guarantee you a spot, but if you're there, we're going to probably select you. And enough teams have probably given some kind of indication he's going to be a first round pick to where he feels confident that he's going to go probably top 25.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of that being like his soft landing spot is probably 25. His ceiling is like lottery. It really is. He's going to be someone though that I think he probably should have declared by testing the waters first though. Just because I think that if he would have returned and in a greater role averaged 18 points and 7 rebounds and 3 assists a game, which I think was not out of the question for him, he'd have gone top 7 in the 2019 class. So it's a weird deal, I think.
For sure, and there's a couple teams with multiple picks in the lottery range. So the Clippers stand out. They're kind of a rebuilding team right now on the fly. Maybe they take a shot. I think it might be one of those teams with 2 picks where, the common consensus approach for some of these executives might be play it safe with 1 and view the extra one as an extra additional shot at maybe a high upside guy. So maybe you see a team with 2 picks take a shot on Zaire in that range.
Yeah, and Phoenix is a team, Atlanta's a team. There are some teams that I think could really do that. Cole, I'll talk to you later this week. It's been good to chat, and we'll talk soon. Bye.